Hi, thank you for joining the session. My name is Farinaz Aryanfar. I have a BA in Middle Eastern Studies from Leiden University in the Netherlands and a Master of Science from Global Studies, Gothenburg University of Sweden. My field of research or my focus has been conflict resolution, racism, and integration. That as a background. I'm going to share with you my master's dissertation. The dissertation's title is Islamophobia and Integration in the Netherlands. It will be also published by Gothenburg University's research portal in a few weeks. The research is about the effects of the Dutch polarization and radicalization action plan, further abbreviated as PRAP projects, implemented during 2008 and 2011. The aim of the research was to explore the implementation of PRAP with regards to its impacts on decreasing Islamophobia. The main research question was, in what way have the implementers of PRAP projects between 2008 and 2011 affected anti-Muslim tendencies as part of their projects, according to the practitioners who were assigned to implement the PRAP projects. The four sub questions are: how is Islamophobia perceived by the practitioners? How did the governmental policies impact the target group according to the practitioners? What did the practitioners think was the reason for the success or lack thereof in the impact of the project? And how are the implemented projects perceived by the field workers in respect to integration? By field workers, I still mean implementers. Just to explain that a dissertation of 50 pages is impossible to be presented in depth in a 10-minute presentation. However, I'm just going to go through all the important matters as far as it is possible. In 2007, the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, ECRI, published a report in which it acknowledged for the first time the discrimination of Muslims in the Netherlands and advised the Dutch government to take action. The Dutch government responded with a letter referring to various direct and indirect policies and action plans that had been set in motion in order to tackle discrimination as a whole. However, in my initial document search, it became clear that none of the policies mentioned Muslims or anti-Muslim groups explicitly, except PRAP. PRAP was an incentive program meant to give municipalities and NGOs the budget and motivation to come up with programs and projects in order to diminish polarization and radicalization in the Dutch society. 10.7 million euros were used, resulting in 78 projects. And although the projects ended in 2011, reports on anti-Muslim sentiments have been alarming in the recent years. Furthermore, the previous research showed that the researchers on Islamophobia either focus on the amount of Islamophobia or Islamophobic actions in the Netherlands, or descriptive ideas of what Islamophobia is and where it comes from and how it can be tackled theoretically. There's not much empirical research on policy analysis regarding Islamophobia. And what we miss is how practitioners see Islamophobia and whether there is a gap between their view and the academic view, as well as policy analysis regarding Islamophobia. Therefore, looking at the action plans and their implications are long overdue. In the theoretical framework, I looked into academic explanations of Islamophobia, all of which are related to racism and exclusion of Muslims or people that have appearances deemed to be Muslim. Furthermore, I dive into theories regarding integration. In the theoretical discussion of integration theories, I argue that there is a predominant Western view of integration cases in Western countries, either the European assimilation, liberal toleration, multiculturalism views are prevalent, where the focus is on how government policies can be viewed as part of each of these theories, or there are Americanist views of segmented assimilation theories, where the focus is the cultural reasons of each migrant's group's upward or downward socioeconomic mobility. For example, within the sphere of employment, education, success, etc. I use qualitative semi-structured interviews and interviewed 21 people, 8 people from 2 NGOs, budgeted under PrAP rule, 6 people from 3 small municipalities, and 7 people from 2 different semi-private organizations. In the semi-private organizations, it was mainly social workers working indirectly for municipalities. The interviews will give an idea of the voices of implementers, plus an idea of how these implementers perceived integration and Islamophobia. The interviews were fully transcribed and thematic analysis were used to find themes and categories within the data. My findings and analysis are that Islamophobia is mainly seen as fear, but also as exclusion, and in some rare cases as racism. People tend to make a literal translation of phobia into fear, while the word choice is explained in the academic arena as just in line with words such as homophobia and xenophobia. Here, our semi-private practitioners, who were mainly social workers, linked Islamophobia with the word phobia, with the word fear. And this also means that they had their own understanding of recognizing phobias and how to deal with it, which means there is a gap of understanding between academic and practitioners. Furthermore, recognizing it as a social problem will mean different ways of signaling and dealing with Islamophobia than assuming it is a kind of anxiety disorder, which is how psychologists and social workers see phobias. And the problem is that there is a lack of information or guidelines to see and recognize Islamophobia by the practitioners and know how to deal with it. And actually, none of them believed their project had explicitly focused on Islamophobia. At best, they had indirectly done something about it while working on, for example, anti-prejudice workshops, etc. They believed Islamophobia, the terminology didn't exist. And therefore, a direct goal to diminish Islamophobia did not present itself during any of the projects that they were that they mentioned. In the municipality, regarding success and failures, municipality employees said that during the interviews that the projects were very one-sided. They also had a very securitizing perspective, using words such as problematic youth or dealing with a calamity, youth loiterers, and they meant by these words gathering around in the street as a danger to the society. That's how they perceived them. And they have a very us versus them perspective in their language usage. They are a very close-knit group of employees in these small municipalities that rather do things through their own unknown networks than to bring in people they are not familiar with, which leads to closing off people from different backgrounds and ethnicities. This is also something further established during conversations about diversity with the employees and the organization composition, and the groups did not consist out of very diverse people. Their success, however, was in bringing different people together in lectures and workshops, albeit in unbalanced power structures. And another success was exchanging of ideas between different people. Here also there is some sort of liberal toleration at work. In the semi-private organization, social workers would deal with cases of newcomers in flats who had very diverse problems, things such as residents with Somalian origins gathering in the porch and drinking tea with 20 people until late at night, while all old residents wanted to get some sleep, go to sleep at 8 o'clock and wake up very early. This difference of behavior lead to some kind of tension, the semi-privates believed. The initial residents would think that the newcomers were lazy and had bad behavior. However, after conversations with the newcomers, it became clear that they were suffering from trauma. They couldn't sleep early. Furthermore, this was their way of dealing with it. Not just that, but also their cultural background. The social workers would help their clients, the newcomers mainly, who were their clients, to change their behaviors according to what was deemed to be normal. Also here, the projects were one-sided. What deemed to be normal was not discussable. The newcomers had to change towards this new culture of normalcy. There is some kind of liberal toleration at work here again, forcing people to change to what is deemed as normal. NGOs aim was to teach about prejudice and make the youth experience what is prejudice and what is exclusion. Their success was also in bringing very different youth together in projects to cooperate and to exchange ideas. Also, they were successful in making deep conversations in a small amount of time. However, sometimes this was also seen as a failure because they did not know how to end this sometimes very therapeutic deep conversations. Within that short time, they were not trained in this area. And furthermore, they would also empower the children to talk about their opinions and to express themselves and talk about how they could react to racist jokes or other racist incidents. However, the practitioners believed here that many schools are structurally racist and racism is not dealt with when reported. They would put it aside as, oh, but they didn't mean it, or well, the practitioners believed were not sure what they were teaching was actually doable. Also, NGO employees had some stereotypical views that Muslims or marginalized people looking like Muslims are homophobic, and based on that assumption, they would focus more on topics of homophobia in schools that were dominated by children with diverse backgrounds or diverse origins. NGOs were furthermore trained not to talk about politics with the children during their sessions, and their main reason was due to safety issues. They believed that kids could start bullying each other if they knew each other's political viewpoints and someone would be in a minority. Politics are therefore deemed very heated. However, my research argues that not talking about a topic will not make the topic go away. And this is thus seen as a weakness. All in all, NGOs have a more multiculturalist approach where they believe talking and bringing people together can bring people closer to each other, and solutions can come forth from those talks. And ideas about how to live together peacefully will also come forth. And there is no forcing people into any choice of leaving a cultural practice behind um, in this context. And however, they believe this mindset only works with children and adults that do not have very strong opinions about something. Many parents and teachers were seen as racist, and because they were not approachable, or they would prevent children to attend some projects, or even the idea of going and visiting a mosque would be very provocative for these parents, and they would not allow their children to go there. So this would be a big barrier within the conversation of multiculturalism. In the conclusion, I start answering whether increased integration leads to less marginalization. I argue that changing identities and losing ties to ethnic community has proven to be challenging to immigrants, as Erickson also suggests. Even if that would be possible, obvious physical characteristics can help with assimilation or make it harder. For example, Swedes can assimilate into Norway much easier than migrants with different hair, skin, and eye color, and who speak a language with an accent. If assimilation is the answer to avoid threatening identities and to securitize core identities by eliminating differences, then the real problem of a fear of diversity is still not tackled. The same fear leads to connection between characteristics such as sleeping late and waking up late that were mentioned by the semi-privates in their conversation, or other examples that came up to suggest that foreigners are lazy or stupid, a generalized idea about all foreigners. As long as one is looking to associate differences to a wide range of people, I argue, and when people fear that all those people are different from us, the us versus them conversation, which Edward Said sees as a problematic discourse, is alive. Not because the migrant did not integrate enough, but because their differences are feared and seen as intrinsic qualities that are linked to a group of people that just have similar visible differences. This is also in line with what van der Walt says, that Islamophobia not only targets Islam and Muslims, but people that are considered to be so by virtue of their external characteristics or ethnic origin. This is also what this research shows. When social workers try to assimilate the new immigrants of the flats into what is the mainstream dominant way of living, the fear of the older inhabitants are not tackled. They gain some understanding of why the new settlers are acting differently, but the question is, what kind of effect does it have in the long run? What kind of effects does it have on their feeling of belonging? As some social workers said, they felt that the immigrants mostly felt tolerated, not accepted. Therefore, it should be highly doubted that assimilation is a successful technique in diminishing conflicts between Muslims or newcomers and the older inhabitants of the flats. In multiculturalism, on the other hand, some scholars argue that cultural differences need to be accommodated, but that this theoretical way of thinking is not always practicizable when different ways of being clash. If person X believes the right way to bring up a child is not influenced, is to not influence their mind with religious ideas, and person Y believes not having a religion will lead to an afterlife in hell, the two ideas clash. However, since everyone is supposed to bring up their own child in their own way, then there isn't any conflict. On the other hand, there would be a conflict if person X thinks that when person Y is raising their child to be religious, they are working against their liberal mindset, and this affects what society as a whole will look in the future. The clash here comes again from an assimilationist idea that there is a core culture in the host country and from the fear of a threatening identity. Or as Edward Said has put it, the Orient is irrational, depraved, fallen, childlike, different, and the European is rational, virtuous, mature, normal. Thus, the fear comes from the idea that the two cultures can be measured, and one culture is more superior than the other. This is why if a parent raises a child with an inferior mindset or culture, it can pose a threat to the core culture and make that become also inferior or irrational in due time. Again, it is this fear, this mindset of the dichotomies where one is thought to be more rational than the other that needs to be tackled. This is why this study points out that when practitioners from NGOs talk about their projects, they think they had an effect on prejudice by bringing the youth together. However, they think their multiculturalist approach will not work when ideas are fixated, when the fear is already shaped and not tackled. Liberal ideas of tolerance come close to assimilationist ideas in their similarity to use force in order to change the migrants' cultural behavior, where assimilationist ideas use force to cut all past cultural ties the migrant has. Liberal tolerance ideas do this for just parts of the culture. Again, the same argument applies. To force people to leave their ways of being relies on the thought that part of their culture forms some kind of a threat to the core national identity, and that their way of being is inferior. This itself is segregative and polarizing. Therefore, it is highly doubtful that liberal ideas of tolerance are helpful to diminish racist and discriminating ideas or to increase the feelings of belonging. Finally, within the Americanist assimilationist ideas put forth by Waters et al. In 2012, selectivism is thought to have the most successful socioeconomic outcome because in this approach, people are not forced to choose different cultural identities, but are allowed to choose cultural elements of the society they live in, as well as elements from their ethnic culture. Furthermore, immigrants are rooted in their own ethnic community in many cases, which makes them more resilient when faced with discrimination and racism. And this does not necessarily lead to decreased or slower economic upward mobility. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or any comments, I would be happy to answer them. I hope to hear from you. Thank you.